So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lance King. I live in New Zealand up here at the top of the world. And I've spent the last 25 years working courses around the world, 37 countries, 250,000 students. And most of that work has been on helping students to develop resilience. And I think that by utilizing strategies helping students to develop resilience, we can, as teachers, develop resilience ourselves. And of course, we've all had the COVID problem the last 2 years. Some of you are still in the COVID disaster. And like you, I've had to turn my office into a recording studio and try and get involved in distance learning. And distance learning I've found to be quite difficult. I mean, I don't have a fixed curriculum to teach, and I don't have fixed classes that I have to teach. So I'm luckier than I imagine most of you. But I've still found it very, very difficult to get that spark, to get to notice that connection when a student or a teacher or anyone that you're working with suddenly gets the message. I found it to be really, really difficult. And I imagine in your life, you found that somewhat difficult as well. And I'm interested in thinking about this from a student's point of view, because students have had unprecedented time online, obviously, in the last 2 years. And that also means they've had unprecedented connection with all the memes and ideas that are flooding through, especially through social media. So whilst they're trying to get their work done and they're trying to do what teachers ask them to do, and they're trying to keep up their standards, they're also exposed to all the memes in the world, like the idea that the world is actually run by rapacious corporations with budgets larger than the budgets of most countries, that all the wealth in the world is concentrated in the hands of very few, that sometime in the near future, China is going to become the largest economy in the world, and some people are really worried that that is going to upset some kind of global balance, that the pollution and the rubbish and the waste in the world is causing the death of so many endangered species. I mean, look at that. That is the most tragic photo I know of. That bird died of starvation because its gut was completely filled with plastic waste. I think that's just such a horror story. And of course, we've got anthropogenic climate change, which is causing temperatures to rise, which are causing the habitats of some of our most endangered animals to be shrinking down to the point where extinctions are going through the roof. And on top of that, we get this COVID pandemic, this viral plague, which is threatening the lives of everyone on the planet. What these to me are creating a perfect storm of influences, pushing all of us towards vulnerability and depression. It's like a combination of hopelessness and helplessness. The idea that there is no hope and there's nothing I can do about it. And this is I think this is a really difficult problem, and I think it is affecting all teachers and all students right now. And some of you are still working through the COVID problem. Some of you, your students are back at school, but they're all suffering from what I call post-COVID trauma. And it's no surprise that some students are of course getting very, very angry about this.
People are suffering, people are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Greta Thunberg, I think she epitomizes that passion, that anger at things that are out of your control. Like students just feel that all the things that are wrong in the world have been done to them by our generation, my generation. But not all of them get angry.
People are suffering.
Many others,
people are dying.
Many others feel vulnerable, anxious, and depressed. And it's those students I want to aim this presentation at helping. So when I started thinking about this and I started doing my research, I thought about, okay, well, if we were to map out hopelessness on a scale, then it would run from a scale from no hope to full of hope, wouldn't it? And if we were to map out helplessness on a scale, then it would run from there's nothing I can do to I have complete control, wouldn't it? But then when I looked at it, I realized that that's actually not a scale of hopelessness, it's a scale of hope. And this is not actually a scale of helplessness, it's a scale of control. And I did a lot of research in this area. My master's thesis was based on developing resilience. And I've read hundreds and hundreds of papers on resilience development, especially in teenagers. And the themes that are coming through all those papers, I think, are that resilience is discovered at the intersection of hope and control. If you put those two things together, you've actually got a resilient way of thinking, a resilient way of being. So I took those two scales and put them together like this. And so now what we've got is we've got resilience being developed through utilizing strategies that generate hope and utilizing strategies that enable a person to take control of what they can take control of. And of course, the opposite on this grid then becomes vulnerability. That person who is vulnerable and susceptible to any influence that is coming their way because they have no control and they feel like there's absolutely nothing they can do and there is no hope. So the first axis on this is the hope axis. So if we look at the hope axis, then it runs from extreme positivity to extreme negativity, which you could think of optimism and pessimism. And the key theorists, of course, in this area are Martin Seligman at the Pennsylvania State University. And of course, we had Shane Yao yesterday talking about resilience, and she is from that same school. And so how do we develop hope? And what is your attitude or your position in terms of thinking in these two ways? Because one of the key things I think Martin Seligman made very, very clear in all his work, that there is no such thing as an optimist or a pessimist. There is only optimistic thinking and pessimistic thinking. And it is our thinking that is actually open to change. And what he showed was that the idea about explanatory style, the way you explain the world to yourself inside your head will determine your position on the scale. So let's just put that to the test. I'll give you a quick quiz here. Just if you're with someone else, you can talk to them about this, but just imagine this situation. You park in a car park building and go shopping. And when you return to the car park building, you notice that there is now a big crease all the way down one side of your car where someone has crashed into you. What do you say to yourself? So this is the question. In that moment, what do you say to yourself? Can you think of something? What would you say to yourself in that moment? If you're with someone else, tell them what you would say to yourself. Now, I'm going to give you three options, and I want you to choose which one, what you just said to yourself, which one of these is it most like? Would you be likely to say to yourself something like, some idiot has run into my car. Where is the car park attendant? He should have prevented this. Or maybe, well, bad stuff happens. Or maybe, this is all my fault. I knew I shouldn't have parked there. And of course, those ways of responding to the situation reveal an orientation towards optimistic thinking or pessimistic thinking. A is the most optimistic thinking, B is kind of neutral thinking, and C is the most pessimistic thinking. Where did you fit on that scale? Here's another one. As you get closer to the car, you notice you've also got a flat tire and you know you don't have a spare tire. What do you say to yourself now? Something like, okay, that's enough bad luck. Something good has to happen now. That's a very optimistic way of thinking, isn't it? Sometimes I have a bad day. That's pretty neutral. Or maybe, why does this always happen to me? Every time I go out in the car, something bad happens. Catastrophizing, typical of pessimistic thinking. Now we'll flip it around a little bit. What about this one? You finally manage to wrench the driver's door open, and as you do, something falls down from behind the dashboard onto the floor. You pick it up and discover it's a piece of jewelry of great personal value that you thought was lost, which because of the crash has now been found. What do you say to yourself now? Well, an optimist might say, even my bad luck is good. Someone neutral might say, well, sometimes good things happen. Someone with more pessimistic thinking might say, maybe I should find the culprit and thank him for crashing into me. Last one. You settle into the car and you notice there's a piece of paper on the passenger seat. You read it and see it's from the person who crashed into your car, offering to pay to fix up your car and also to lend you another car until yours is fixed. What do you say to yourself now? The optimist might say, I knew it would all come out right in the end. More neutral response might be sometimes I have a good day. What would a pessimistic response be like in that situation? Maybe something terrible is bound to happen now. So, I mean, these are just silly questions, but they define an orientation towards optimistic thinking or pessimistic thinking. And optimistic thinking, a pervasive optimistic thinking, is linked to better physical health, more antibodies, less disease, less depression, longer life, more happiness, and more resilience. It is a good mindset. It is a good way to think in terms of producing success. But it doesn't necessarily do that. And complete focus on optimistic thinking has some flaws in it. And the flaws, there's 3 critical flaws, which pessimistic thinking is more useful for. For example, pessimistic thinking is linked with a more accurate judgment of your own abilities. Like, for example, imagine you're in hospital and you're going in for surgery. Would you like the surgeon to have optimistic thinking or pessimistic thinking? Probably pessimistic thinking, so that he or she is an accurate judge of their own abilities. If you're going to a bank manager to invest some money, would you like that bank manager to be optimistic in their thinking or pessimistic in their thinking? Probably a bit more pessimistic than optimistic. I don't know. The pessimistic thinker is less inclined to take risks, and the pessimistic thinker is less likely to blame others for their own mistakes. So pessimistic thinking is actually very, very useful in some specific situations. But a focus on pessimistic thinking is connected with poorer health, more depression, and more helplessness. So it seems to me that the intersection of optimistic thinking with personal control, taking control where you can, where actually overcomes those problems. So this is what my model is based on. So, and now we look at the control axis. So the control axis goes from never taking action to always taking action. Now, the key theorist here is Julian Rotter, who produced a model called locus of control. And someone who never ever takes action might be described as a sort of person who has an external locus of control. They believe that the influence on their life comes from outside completely. They have no control. And someone who always takes action may well have an internal locus of control, where they are always taking action to improve their lot. So where would you fit on that, do you think? So let's do some more quick questions here. Imagine this. Imagine you're in a taxi in a big city and it stops in traffic and waits about a half a mile from your destination. 10 minutes passed with no movement. What do? Do you just wait patiently? Do you ask the taxi driver to find another route? Do you pay off the taxi, get out and walk? Or do you get out, walk to the front of the traffic jam, find out what the problem is, fix it, get back in your taxi and carry on? Because each of those is an increasing level of control. And so we go from external to internal across this axis here. I've just realized that Lorenzo asked me to say 2 things when I started that I was somewhat nervous, and so I went straight over. The 2 things are, I'll share them now. One is that you can ask me any questions. You can write the questions in the Q&A tab. So click on Q&A and write any questions, and I will review them at the end. And we've got 15 minutes for questions at the end, with a bit of luck. And the other thing is that the session is being recorded and will be available after the session. So that's all. Hopefully I've covered that. Getting back to this. So imagine what the second one here is. Imagine you're on the footpath and you see someone who is struggling to parallel park their car. Do you keep on walking? Do you ask them what their problem is? Do you guide them in using hand signals? Or do you tell them to get out of the car so you can park it for them? Each one is an increasing internality in control. And people are defined by this. What is your particular way of operating? Third one, imagine you're in a project team at school. What is your normal role working in a project team with other teachers? Do you leave it up to everyone else to do all the work? Do you focus on doing your part only? Do you help manage everyone else's tasks as well as your own? Or do you complete everyone else's tasks as well as your own? This shows a tendency from A to D of increasing internality and control. And the last one, Imagine your family is going to New Zealand for your next school holidays. Well, imagine that. That would be great, wouldn't it? We will get there one day. But just imagine this. What is your normal role in setting up an overseas trip like this? Do you let someone else organize everything? Do you just look after yourself? Do you organize the flights and accommodation and make sure everyone in the family knows exactly what they need to do to get ready? Or do you pack everyone's bags for them, organize every minute of the holiday, keep hold of everyone's passport and tickets and herd them all along like sheep? Those will define, in a silly way, where you are with regards internal and external locus of control. So this is a model that I call my Gnostates model. Excuse me, my throat. And it's Gnostates from the Greek gnosis, which means knowledge, in particular self-knowledge. So these are states of self-knowledge. So we have the resilient, positive thinking, taking action. We've got the vulnerable, never taking action, thinking negatively. We've also got the hopeful. This is the student who is very, very positive. Like this is, in my experience, the kind of 14-year-old boy experience where he says to the teacher or to his mum, he says, I'm going to ace that test. I'm going to get really, really good marks. That's going to be easy for me. I can do it. I can do it easily. No, I'm not going to do any study for it. No, I'll just wing it. I'll just do it on natural talent. That's what I call hopeful. Very, very positive, but not prepared to take any action to bring about a positive outcome. And then down here we have the stoic. And the stoic is that kind of student who works really hard and plods along and is solid and reliable, but generally fairly pessimistic about the outcome. They don't think it's going to turn out well. And so these are the 4 no states that students can be in. And the characteristics of them I'll put up here. Well, for the resilient, it's obvious, bounces back, takes control, and is self-motivated. The hopeful has a positive attitude, easygoing, risk taker, and self-promoting. The stoic, conservative, pessimistic, but solid and reliable, and often self-blaming. And the vulnerable, accepting, passive, often locked into their I can'ts, and self-limiting. So if you're interested in this model, what I've produced is I've tried to produce work to show people how to move themselves wherever they are on this grid, to move themselves into that resilient quadrant. And to do that, you can, if you're interested in this analysis, you can go to my website, taolearn.com, daolearn.com. This is what it looks like. You go up into that top left-hand corner, which looks a bit like this, and you see that word no states there, and you click on the word no states, 2 quizzes come up. They're age-appropriate quizzes, so you can get your students to do this quiz do these quizzes as well. So I've organized it so it's all completely age-appropriate. You do the 2 quizzes, you discover where in the no states grid you end up, and then you get a whole lot of strategies of how to move into the more resilient quadrant. You see, this is the basic framework. Now, each of those 4 quadrants is subdivided into 4 sub-quadrants. So there are actually 16 positions on this quadrant where you can end up, and you get a page or a couple of pages of ideas and strategies that you can use to move more into the resilient quadrant. So it's all free, it's all available, it's been there for a while. Feel free to utilize it as you wish. But I'm going to show you some of those strategies that you can use with students. So how do we teach resilience to students? And notice that if you do teach these strategies to students, it will help you develop your own resilience as well. So first, you've got to engage their attention. You've got to capture their attention with the idea of resilience. And you've got to make sure that they understand exactly what resilience is about. You've got to reach a common understanding. Then it's really, really useful to activate their own experience of resilience so they can draw up strategies from inside themselves. And then it's often really useful to create powerful metaphors to demonstrate resilience, especially for younger children. And lastly, help students to practice strategies of hope and control. So what are these? Well, I often start, I like using videos, as you can probably tell, and I start, when I'm teaching students about resilience, I start with something like this. Now, this is a clip from the Billy Elliot movie. Do you remember that? that movie, here's a young boy who wants to learn to dance, but he's got all sorts of obstacles he has to overcome to get there. His parents aren't interested, he can't tell them. His friends aren't interested, he can't tell them. The only class he can get to is a ballet class. He's the only boy in the class. All the other students are young girls. They're younger than him, they're smaller than him, and they're better than him at dance. And so he's struggling all the time. And right now he's struggling to learn to pirouette.
Nothing. Prepare 1 and 2. Strong position. Weight on both legs. And pirouette and down. Ooh. Up you get. Find a place on that bloody wall and focus on that spot. Then whip your head round and come back to that spot. Prepare. 1 and 2 and... Okay. Have you got the spot? Prepare. Prepare. Go. 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 Go, Billy.
Okay, so the key point, oops, doing that again. The key point I make with students is that resilience is a superpower, and it's the superpower of overcoming adversity. That is really what classify or categorizes resilience, the ability to overcome adversity. And it takes organization and planning and persevering and self-motivation. All those things are in there as well. But the key identifying characteristic of resilience is overcoming adversity. So once they're clear about what resilience means and they've been hooked with some kind of visual thing like a video clip, then what you need to do is activate their own experience. Help them draw out their own personal resilience strategy. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to do this exercise as well while I'm talking. So, and this is something you can teach to students of any age. So what I'm asking you to do is right now, I want you all to remember a time when, for example, you're working on a task or doing a job or playing sport or trying to learn something new, and you suffered a serious setback or failure, disappointment or problem. But it has to be one example when you did manage to get back up again and finish the task, the job, the game, the learning. Can you think of that? I'll give you a couple of minutes. And what I'm interested to know is, how did you get yourself back on task after the setback? That's the critical thing, because that's your resilience strategy. So think about that. How did you manage that? And once you have thought that out, write it down and get your students to write it down and then get them to share it. One word of caution here, if you're using this with students and you get to this point where they've written down their resilience strategy and you're asking them to share it, it's very important that you say to the students, I'd really be interested in hearing what your resilience strategy is. I don't want to hear what the difficulty was that you had to overcome. That's personal, that's private, and you need to keep that to yourself. But I'm very interested to hear what your strategy was for overcoming it, because we don't want students in class to revisit anything that's traumatic for them. So you're just asking them to reveal their strategy, not what they used the strategy to overcome. But once they've shared it, they discover that every single student's got a strategy and everyone's strategy is different. And then what you do is you say to your students, well, there you've got that strategy for overcoming difficulties. Do you ever have any difficulties in everyday life? And of course, they'll say yes. And they say, well, that's an opportunity to practice your strategy. Let me give you my own personal example. This happened quite recently. This is my wife and I about just at Christmas. We decided to build a shed. So I bought a kit set shed. It was all steel framing and steel panels and clamps to hold it down. So I built a deck and I built the shed on the deck with my wife's help, and we worked really, really hard and we built it. It was all bolted together and it was wonderful. Then about 3 weeks later, that's a photograph through the window looking at the shed, or what remains of the shed, because we had a huge westerly storm that blew my shed to pieces, basically tore it up into shreds. And so there we were, we'd put all this work in and it was completely gone. So what did I have to do? Well, that was when I had to summon up all my strength and make a plan and get working. And so what I did was I ripped up the deck and I dug big holes and I put big, huge wooden posts in the holes and concreted them in. As you can see them there, and you see all the tin on the right, that was what was left of the shed after the storm. So I then pulled apart all the pieces of tin and bolted them securely to a heavy wooden frame, and ended up today with the shed a much more secure platform, and hopefully it will last all storms. But that's the kind of thing. If you can think of an example like that and talk to your students about that and get them to come up with an example of overcoming adversity, then what you're doing is you're showing them that you don't need to teach them how to do resilience, that they can do it themselves. They already know how to do resilience. It's inside of them. Your task as a teacher is to help them draw out what they can already do. So that's, I would suggest, that's a wonderful exercise to do with students. So also, moving on, I haven't really given you much time for that, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So moving on, metaphors can be really powerful of resilience. So here's one. This is a little video clip on resilience for young children.
Who does it look like?
It looks like me.
That's right. I want you to do everything that you can to knock your toy down.
I'm not going to have time to go through the whole clip. You can see it on YouTube, metaphors for resilience. But you get the idea. With young children, you can give them something like those knockoverable dolls and show them that's what resilience is, the ability to bounce back up again. And then what you want to do is you want to help your children, students in your class, engage with hope, like pay attention to hope. This is the whole thing with Martin Seligman and explanatory style. What we pay attention to tends to occupy our thoughts. And so if we can help students to pay attention to hope, then that will start occupying their thoughts. So there's a whole list of exercises here, very, very simple. Review their own past successes, list them and add to the list often. Look for the positives in everyday life. You know, do they have a roof over their head? Do they have food on the table? Do they have a good school to go to? Do they have teachers who look after them? All these things, get them to list them and add to that list every day. Share one positive newsfeed story. You know, they're always engaged, or this is older students, of course, engaged with social media and online a lot. So get them to find a positive newsfeed story and share that every day, or an image of hope and share that. And make sure that they are deliberately liking messages of hope that they see. Get them to commit to one unselfish action per day. This is that moment when you wake up in the morning, you as in your life, you wake up first in the morning and you go and make a cup of tea and you take it to your partner and you give it to your partner while your partner's still in bed asleep. Now that kind of unselfish action is the thing that actually they feel good about, which then you feel good about. So you're actually focusing on the positives by helping other people. Make progress on one goal. In order to make progress, you have to be future oriented and you have to be positively oriented in that way. So make progress on one goal, celebrate successes, and lastly, encourage others to be more positive. These are all simple strategies which, if done on a regular basis, can be very useful for students. Oh, by the way, all the notes for this session, all these notes you're looking at here, will be, I'll put them on my profile in my documents as soon as I finish this session. So now we're going to look at control. Now here's another little clip, this time on control. Have a look at this. What do you think about these people's control?
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Once again, I don't really have time to play the whole thing, but an obviously external locus of control. There's nothing I can do. I'm stuck on an escalator. So the trick with control is to control what you can control. Don't spend time and energy and mental anguish on the things that you cannot control. Focus on what you can control and make sure you're exerting as much control as possible where you can. So how to do this? Well, for young people, teenagers anyway, certainly social media is an area of control that some students find somewhat difficult, and they may well be caught up in something that they're not even aware of. I mean, I always like to say to students, there's two key principles of social media. You've got to realize that everything you post is there forever, even if you delete it. Someone with the right skills can always find it. And if a service is free, then you are the product. Your data is being sold. And this is where we get into the whole outrage economy, because on the other side of that screen is an artificial intelligence running algorithms designed to keep you on that screen. And of course, the thing that keeps you on the screen most is outrage. And so what happens is children sometimes, or young people, teenagers, sometimes get themselves completely into a wormhole of outrage and despair, and it says to them that that is everything that's available in the world, because that's what the algorithm is feeding to them. So we can't get children off social media, but we can help them to take a little bit more control over engagement, careful choice over connections, links and likes. And of course, the aim of the AI is to get people to buy things through advertising. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is a shareware program called AdBlock, excuse me, which you can download, and it eliminates all the advertising. I don't understand why everyone in the world doesn't have it. But I've also got a whole lot of social media skills. I think these are vitally important to teach students. And for some reason, I seem to be almost out of time. So I will just go through them very quickly. These are also available in the documents folder in my profile at this conference. So we want young people to identify their own virtues and values, who they are as a person and who they want to be. And most importantly, to identify the difference between reputation and character. You know, that great John Wooden quote, be more concerned about your character than your reputation, because your character is who you really are, whereas your reputation is merely what other people think you are. And so we want children to focus on what is my character, and then create an identity online that focuses on strengths. We had that session on strengths-based focus yesterday, focused on strengths, goals, and exemplifying those virtues. We want them to find positive, inspirational adults to follow, because there's all the work on role modeling and coaching, which is very, very important in helping young people to link to adults rather than people their own age, but inspirational adults whom they could then see how they achieved the outcome of their journey, and maybe set goals similarly for themselves. To make ethical choices about likes. Likes are not just random. They actually create a profile that AI is feeding on. So make that profile as positive as possible. Set up and maintain strong relationships both online and offline. So make sure that students are engaged in real-time connection with other students, and have regular, deliberate digital holidays. How many people do that? You know, it's funny. Everyone says, yeah, I could go without my phone for a day. That wouldn't be a problem at all. That'd be easy. But how many of us actually do that? And the last thing is social action. One key thing to help students overcome hopelessness and helplessness is get them involved in social action projects, specifically in their own community. You know, get them to do an analysis of their own community in terms of who are the disadvantaged people, where are the wasted resources, where are the resources scarce, and get them to take some action, to get out there and try and alleviate one of the social needs. And then if they manage to do, or when they manage to do that and they engage with that, they may not be totally successful, but they will have a very useful experience of trying to alleviate a social need. If they show any positive direction at all, then the trick is to get them to then think about, how would we scale that up? How could that be scaled up to a city, country, national program to alleviate a social need through social action, and helping students to realize that they can take social action to affect how they feel, because taking action to help someone else always creates a more positive attitude inside the student. Social action is critically important. And all these exercises are available on my new platform called lalatat.com if you're interested. That's the one on social action. I think I'm just about done. Yes, I am. There we are. So there's my email address, and there's conversations happening on social media about Lalatat. If you're interested, you can send me an email.